The air was thick with the scent of roses, and the quiet murmur of waves crashing against the shore. The evening sky burned with hues of orange and crimson, casting long shadows over the sand. Where lovers once walked hand in hand, whispering promises they swore would last forever, Amelia stood at the edge of the balcony, her gaze lost in the horizon, where the sun kissed the sea, her heart a battlefield of emotions torn between devotion and desire. She had spent years by Christopher's side painting a picture of love so perfect that even she had begun to believe it, yet in the quiet recesses of her heart another name echoed, a name she had sworn to forget. But never could Alexander. Fate had a cruel sense of humor, was at a masquerade ball, one of those grand events where secrets hid behind silk and laughter was merely a veil over whispered confessions, that she had found herself staring into the eyes that once unraveled her soul. Alexander stood before her clad in a suit of midnight, his presence a ghost from a past she had buried. He did not speak, yet his gaze held 1,000 words she had once memorized, words she had once lived for. Christopher had been away on business in Paris, leaving Amelia to navigate the lonely halls of their grand estate. She told herself it was loneliness that led her to Alexander's arms, the need for warmth in the absence of her husband's touch. But deep down she knew it was more than that. It was unfinished desires, it was the fire she had forced herself to douse, only to realize the embers had remained smoldering beneath the surface, waiting for a breath to ignite them once more. Yak meeting was stolen in the shadows of moonlit gardens, between rustling leaves and hurried whispers. They spoke of things that were never meant to be spoken. They touched with hands that trembled between love and sin. They kissed with the desperation of those who knew time was not on their side. Love affairs built on secrecy are like castles made of sand. No matter how beautiful, they will always crumble. Amelia knew this. She had seen it in the way Alexander's fingers lingered too long on her skin, the way his voice carried an edge of something dangerously close to hope. She had felt it in the way her heart ached at the thought of choosing between the love that gave her stability and the love that set her on fire. Right was a letter that shattered the fragile illusion, a single sheet of parchment resting on her vanity table, sealed with the crest she knew all too well, Christopher's handwriting stark against the ivory paper. I know his name, it read, simple, direct, a storm waiting to be unleashed. Panic surged through Amelia's veins like venom. She had always known that the truth had claws, but she had never anticipated the pain of its grip. Would Christopher confront her? Would he leave her? Would he stay and watch her unravel under the weight of her choices? She had loved him once, had built a life beside him, had whispered the same promises into his ear that she now whispered into Alexander's. Night was cold when Christopher returned, his eyes unreadable, his demeanor calm to calm. He poured a glass of whiskey, swirled the amber liquid, watched it dance against the glass before speaking. Do you love him? His voice did not rise, did not betray the storm beneath his skin. Amelia did not answer. Silence stretched between them, heavy like a noose tightening with each breath. Stood, walked to the window, gazed out at the night as if seeking answers in the constellations. Love is a fragile thing, Amelia, a single crack and it shatters into pieces, too small to ever mend again. She wanted to tell him that love was never meant to be perfect, that love was wild and uncontrollable, that love did not obey the rules set by society or by vows exchanged under candlelight. She wanted to tell him that she had never stopped loving him, even as she had fallen into Alexander's arms, that love could be divided, that love could be real even in its most complicated forms. But words failed her. Christopher left the next morning. The space beside her in bed, cold and untouched. The days turned into weeks, turned into months. Amelia found herself staring at the waves once more, watching them crash and retreat, much like love, much like betrayal. Alexander had waited for her, had held out his hand, had asked her to choose him, but how could she choose when her heart was no longer whole, when the love she once knew had been torn between devotion and desire? And so she stood alone, watching the sun kiss the sea, lost in the untold stories of love and betrayal that lived within her heart. Days blurred into years, and the echoes of the past never faded. Christopher never returned to the home they once built. Instead, he sent a letter of annulment, one final farewell written in ink that burned more than fire. Alexander, too, had grown weary of waiting for a woman who could not choose between the two halves of her soul. He left for a world beyond her reach, leaving behind only the ghost of his touch and the scent of his cologne that still lingered in the corners of her memory. And later remain alone, a prisoner of her own choices, wandering through the empty halls of a house filled with ghosts of the past. Sometimes she would stand by the shore, listening to the waves, hoping they would carry away the weight of her regrets. She would sit by the garden where Alexander once held her hands, tracing invisible patterns in the wind, whispering his name into the night. Years later, when Amelia lay on her deathbed, she realized that love and betrayal were never separate things. They were entwined, inseparable. One could not exist without the other. She had loved fiercely and betrayed deeply, and in the end she had been both the sinner and the sinned against. With her last breath, she whispered both their names, Christopher and Alexander, to men who had defined her life, and yet neither had remained. For her final moments, her eyes closed, and the world faded into darkness, leaving behind only the untold stories of love and betrayal that would never be known by anyone but her.